Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty, and joining me this week is Russell Glasser.
Hi.
Must have been, 4 weeks since the last? No, actually, it was longer because you gave up.
6 weeks.
You gave up your week, the week we did the God movie.
Yeah, homework.
And that reminds me that the last 2 weeks of this particular month, July, PACT is going to be doing some work around the studios, and we will not be live for those final 2 weeks of this month. One of those weeks, we're hoping to rebroadcast the episode that had the God movie. So for those of you who missed it, you'll have a chance to see it again. And we're not quite sure what's going to rebroadcast in the other slot. But as soon as those 2 weeks are up, we will be back again live in August. And, you know, unlike a lot of other shows, we don't really have a season. We try and do it every week, 52 weeks out of the year, as much as possible. So speaking of live, today is July 9th, 2006. We are live. The Atheist Experience is a live call-in public access television program giving the atheist community of Austin the opportunity to interface with the public, answer questions, address issues, talk about topics that range from, you know, religion to philosophy to anything else under the sun. We'll have the number up for you shortly. You can call in, but we've got some announcements to get out of the way first and a little bit of a presentation on a topic as usual.
By the way, this cool new thing that you've got going on with the sign here seems to be a little less cool with the titles blocking.
Well, yeah. For those of you who can't see the screen at all, we put up some new little signs because the other ones you couldn't read before. But
and for our podcast audience, that says "Faith is just gullibility."
Yeah. We are live today. The show broadcasts on Sundays from 4:30 to 6 p.m. We're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road at 11:30, except for the third Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series at the Austin History Center located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. This month's lecture will actually be on the fourth Sunday of the month, which I believe is the 23rd. And we'll have a representative of Planned Parenthood there talking about the religious rights involvement and impact, and religion in general's impact on reproductive rights and laws and other issues like that. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio program called The Nonprofits. That's PROPHETS. We weren't live this week, so we'll be live this coming Saturday, which will be July 15th. For more information about how to connect and listen to the program, you can go to nonprofitsradio.com. For more information on both of the programs, you can go to www.atheist-community.org. There's information there about both this program as well as the Nonprofit Show and all of our other activities. There's a calendar and a schedule of events, which we'll be adding to. There's a lot of activity going on within the group, getting folks together to participate in more social events. Enjoy the rest of the summer, and then since we live in Austin where the weather's nice almost all the time, we're going to try and get those events to carry on throughout the next year and beyond. The Nonprofits is hosted by Jeff D., co-hosted by Dennis Lubay, features Russell Glasser and myself, and is available live if you connect directly. For now, we're not affiliated with any network, but also you can download the MP3s from older shows and listen to and subscribe to the podcast for the Nonprofits. The Atheist Experience program, the audio portion is available at our website and as a podcast. So we'd like to say hello to all the podcast listeners. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the feedback. Anybody who has questions or comments can email tv@atheist-community.org. There's also another email address for the Nonprofits, but the cast and crew of all those shows get them. We try to respond to as many as we can. It's not always as timely as we would like because there's more and more people listening all the time, and we really appreciate it. And if you have ideas on topics that you'd like to see us discuss or current events that we may have overlooked or anything, please feel free to send that in. So that covers the lecture series. In addition, the ACA hosts a number of social events throughout the week. One of them that we typically mention here, there's an Atheist Happy Hour on Thursdays at 7:30. That's at Ninfa's on Anderson near 183 and I-35. Chance to come down, have a drink, have some dinner, meet some of the ACA folks. And also after this program, we go to dinner, all the cast and crew, and we invite viewers in the Austin area. Any atheist or atheist-friendly people welcome to join us at Threadgill's. That's on Riverside. We go off the air at 6 o'clock. We're normally there between 6:30 and 6:45. The address on your screen. We look forward to seeing any of you. If you're coming down to preach or proselytize, please don't bother. We'll have the number up, and you can call in and I don't know, state your case and have a reasonable little debate. But there are some questions that get asked over and over and over again. We'll try to answer whatever we can, but on occasion we will direct you to the frequently asked questions portion of the website, where a lot of these are addressed rather succinctly. So you'll be able to get some answers there, and then maybe you can reformulate a question that goes a little deeper on a particular subject, and we can try and hit it. I don't know what other announcements. Oh, there are actually a couple other announcements. On Wednesday the 19th, I'll be doing an interview for Co-op, the nonprofit radio station here in Austin, live from 1 to 1:30. So anybody who wants to can tune in and listen there. We'll be talking a little bit about the group and probably a little bit about me since I'll be sitting there. But I know there was something else. I don't have it written down though. We had board meeting this morning, and we had the normal breakfast this morning. I don't know. Oh, there was something. The nonprofits. Yes. The nonprofits used to be rebroadcast by freethoughtradio.com.
Oh, yes.
They would pick up the live stream and feed it out. A couple weeks ago, we broke off that association because of some listener comments and some discussion amongst ourselves. There is some minor affiliation between Free Thought Radio and the Atheist Law Center, which is an organization founded by Larry Darby. We were no longer being a company, being associated with that organization, even indirectly. We tried to figure out a way around it. We ended up deciding that we would just drop Free Thought Radio, and now it turns out that the Atheist Law Center is now defunct.
I don't think you mentioned yet that Larry Darby, we had a problem with Larry Darby because he was apparently anti-Semitic and a Holocaust denier.
Yeah, well, Holocaust revisionist, I don't know.
Yeah.
He has particular verbiage, but I'll go with Holocaust denier because it makes sense. There was a lot of things we had problems with Larry Darby, being anti-Semitic, and also, he was tied with various white separatist organizations. And, while once upon a time Larry Darby was American Atheist of the Year when he was working against Judge Roy Moore in Alabama with the Ten Commandments issues.
And good for him.
And did great work there. Unfortunately, while, not every atheist agrees or thinks the same about different issues, and we decided, I think the direct quote was, we didn't want to be associated with what was the phrase we used? Racist, bigoted morons, lunatics, racist lunatics.
That sounds like something Jeff said.
That was something Jeff said.
Or would say.
But anyway, the Atheist Law Center is no more, and Larry Darby, to top it all off, despite, nobody seems to want to stay associated with him. The American Atheists kind of distanced themselves from him, put somebody new in place in Alabama, and while he was making this bid for running, I think he ran for Attorney General or something. But anyway, he tried to associate himself with, I guess, any group he could, and now he says he's no longer an atheist. He believes in the sort of God that Jefferson talked about, nature's God, which I guess would make him some sort of deist. And he ascribes to the moral teachings of Jesus in a way that would make Jesus proud, is what he said. So I guess it seems that we might have made the right call about Mr. Darby and the ELC.
Yeah, he's not still an atheist, but he is still a Democrat, and my political leanings being what they are, I don't say this often, but but we have a complete moron running as a Democrat.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me was that he still managed to garner like 44% of the vote as an open atheist, cozying up to these religious white separatist organizations. Mm-hmm. And of course, they found out that he has an ex-wife that is Chinese or whatever, so they labeled him a race traitor and kind of distanced themselves from him anyway. There's a big mess around this, and we don't need to go into it. We've already gotten into it way more than we have. Well, the good news is that we're working towards getting other hosting for the nonprofit show. You can still connect directly. You can still listen to the MP3s and the podcast after the fact. But we want to get back and try and keep the live broadcast going, get people into the chat room to communicate with us while we're doing the show. And so we'll be looking for some new hosting. But That's all I got, and it went way too long.
Okay.
What do you got?
That's all right. Mine, let's see. I don't think I prepared that much on this topic today. I had sort of a general idea that I'd talk about the nature of truth, but what I wound up with is a whole bunch of random stuff which is going to have horrible segues connected to it. But I'm calling my topic To Tell the Truth. And I'm going to start by indulging in one of my favorite activities, which is ridiculing somebody on the religious right.
That is so fun.
Yeah, it is. And today I'm going to talk about the Reverend Lewis P. Sheldon, who helped to promote this big flap that's been going on in Boston, Massachusetts. Reverend Lewis P. Sheldon is the chairman of the Traditional Values Coalition, so you know he's just a fun guy at parties.
Isn't it great that you can just tell by the name who's most likely to be running a particular organization?
Right.
If it's traditional values, family values, oddly enough, there are people who I wouldn't want to come anywhere near my family.
Yeah, because we hate traditional values and want to destroy them.
The evil atheist conspiracy.
Or because this whole idea of traditional values has gotten grabbed and warped beyond all recognition. Anyway, I'll just launch into the story. This is the Reverend Lewis P. Sheldon speaking. The mainstream media has ignored a major news story out of Massachusetts involving a first grader who was dragged and beaten on the playground at Estabrook Elementary School in Lexington. His crime? He is the son of David Parker, a concerned parent who objects to his son being taught about homosexuality. School officials have admitted that the attack on his son was planned and premeditated. In April 2005, did I mention this is from June 20th? A lot has happened since then. This was like two or 3 weeks ago. Sorry for the interruption. In April 2005, Parker met with the Estabrook principal and the director of education over the promotion of homosexuality in the classroom. He asked to be notified in advance about any pro-homosexual teachings so that he could pull his child out of class. He then refused to leave the office until they agreed to his request, so they called the police and had him arrested for trespassing instead. He was handcuffed and spent a night in jail before facing a judge. Ever since the arrest for trespassing, he and his family have been the victims of a pro-homosexual smear campaign in Lexington. In the latest attack, Parker's first grader was assaulted on the playground by 8 to 10 children on the second anniversary of the imposition of same-sex marriage in Massachusetts by the Supreme Judicial Court. These young hoodlums surrounded Parker's son on the playground, did all sorts of nasty things about him that I'm not going to read because it's inflammatory. And fortunately, one girl ran to stop the beating.
So wait a minute, a bunch of little kids
Yes.
on the anniversary of homosexual marriage being allowed in Massachusetts.
I suppose. Yes.
These little kids decided to beat up somebody who was against.
I guess these little 6-year-olds decided that they were so much in favor of gay marriage that they would teach this boy a lesson for something his father said. That's the story anyway. Where are the outcries against hate crimes by liberal journalists? Where are the candlelight vigils on behalf of his son? Has Parker been invited to tell his story on Good Morning America? Of course not. Liberal hatred directed against a first grader isn't apparently considered hate, but justice directed at the son of a homophobic parent. So this was at various places around the internet. I don't think it really rose to the level of the real big-time blowhards, but it was majorly promoted by this group called Mass Resistance, which I guess is some sort of pun because they're in Massachusetts. And a few weeks later, I got interested in this story because, I mean, first of all, if some kids really did gang up in a group of 8 to 10 and bully this one kid for his father's beliefs, that would be wrong, and I would disagree with it. But I found it a little implausible. So I waited a few weeks and then looked on the school's website, and sure enough, they had a press release talking about their side of the story, which was a little different than the mass resistance version of it. I didn't print out the school's press release, but I just printed some of my observations on what it said. And by the way, you can find a longer version of this on my blog, which you can get to through russellglasser.blogspot.com. I decided it was easier for people to remember that and then be linked to my real blog. So basically, first of all, David Parker in the original story claimed that it was a group of 8 to 10 kids. The school says it was 1 kid. The mass resistance and other right-wing press stories said, according to Mr. Parker, school authorities determined from an investigation into the assault that the beating was planned and premeditated. The school actually didn't say any such thing. That was made up. What they did say was the kids were in a disagreement over who would sit where in the cafeteria. Despite the allegedly severe beating, the parents declined to file a complaint with the police, so I guess filing a complaint with mass resistance was enough. 2 weeks later. And following the incident, the boys were observed arm in arm at school, and subsequently the child who was hit went to the house of the child who hit him for a play date. So these kids are apparently friends. And they got in a fight over who would sit next to whom in the cafeteria. Now, this is not in any way to justify one kid getting bullied by another kid, because that's terrible, and schools should always try as hard as they can to foster an environment where that doesn't happen. But this whole thing about a mob of 8 to 10 kids surrounding and cornering this one kid, because they care so much about gay rights, is a bit of jumping to conclusions, I would think. Now, you might say, okay, well, but here we have the one story from these people who say that it was the homosexual agenda, and here we have the other story from the school, which no doubt has its own agenda. So surely the truth must lie halfway in between, right? Because that's sort of the way a lot of people think about truth. Well, we have a news story from the Boston Globe on July 5th. That's about 4 days ago, I think, where basically David Parker said, "Are parents and administrators telling little children to get my son on the playground because of his father's beliefs? No, I doubt it. You have children being exposed to the notion that this guy or this family is wrong and maybe is a bad guy. That can influence their actions." So basically, this guy threw this out there with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Just, just an agenda to basically push his homophobic agenda.
This goes really well with what we've been talking about earlier, in other recent episodes about claims of persecution.
Right, persecution, which I think Don's topic a few weeks ago. Right.
Really what we most likely, and by the way, I know you're going to get to this, the issue of the truth being halfway between, that's not the case. The truth may in fact lie somewhere in between, but if you've got one story at this extreme and one story at this extreme, the truth could really be way the hell over here.
Right.
It doesn't have to be, in the middle. And it could be that either one of the stories are true.
Yeah, and there's something weird about the way people view news these days, which I think is fostered by organizations like Fox News, which I've talked about in the past, where basically their slogan is fair and balanced, meaning you've got one side of the story, you present the other side of the story. But it's not fair, balanced, and accurate. And what responsible news organizations do, or used to do, or ought to do, is look at both sides of the story and then figure out which side actually has evidence on its side.
Well, there is an issue with the balancing, though. I mean,
Yes.
if you have one intelligent liberal and about 100 nut job right-wing conservatives, that's kind of balanced.
Or we should say one intelligent atheist, just
Yes.
to stay on topic
Just-
and apolitical.
Sure.
But it does seem so much that in stories like this, the desires of theocrats seems to coincide with those of conservatives, and it seems to me that we have actually two different standards for looking at truth. One of them is sort of the scientific standard, and one of them is the legalistic standard. I mean, if you're a scientist trying to figure out what's actually true, what you're obligated to do is actually go out there yourself and look for evidence that you are right, and also look for evidence that you're wrong. A scientist's job is actually partly to try to disprove his own theories, and he has to basically give it his best effort and try to beat up his own theory as much as he can before he publishes it, because if he doesn't do that, then other people will beat him up, and he hasn't done his own diligence, and his theory will be weaker. That's kind of the scientific notion of truth. On the other hand, we have this legalistic version of truth, which is actually very different, where we've got one lawyer who's basically dedicated to use any trick that he can to convince you that one side is right. And you've got the other side doing the same on the opposite side. And then the jury doesn't get a chance to investigate the facts, but they listen to both lawyers, and one of them is more persuasive. And this leads to a sort of overall philosophical topic of what do we really think truth actually is? When you believe in God, you believe that there's not only some sort of ultimate truth, but you also believe that there's some sort of ultimate prescriber of truth. You say that there's a guy who knows everything, and I only listen, and I listen to what this guy says, and therefore I'm always right. When you get into the scientific way of thinking, and particularly if you're an atheist, obviously you don't believe in God. So the problem of arriving at what is actually the truth is a little more difficult, because you don't have a guy or a book telling you, this is true, this is not true, this is right, this is wrong, and believe my words or I'll smite you. When you don't believe in God, the only thing you can do to figure out the truth is actually go out and observe things and try to figure out which way does the evidence actually point me. Am I being honest with myself? Are there some things that I've overlooked? Are there ways that I could be wrong? And you sort of have to be always willing to be convinced that you're wrong. So ultimately, nothing is ever considered 100% certain in the scientific point of view, which confuses a lot of Christians, because they say things like, well, you can't listen to science, or you can't listen to atheists because this is all about relativism, and everything's relative, we don't know anything, everything is permitted. In science, they're always changing their mind and stuff, and this is much better because we have God to tell us who's right. What did you have something to say, Matt?
I was just going to say that before we get in deep
Yes.
on epistemology and truth, everything else, there is one caller who wanted to address, I guess, the story
David
you were
Parker.
talking about before.
Yeah.
Is it Sierra?
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
Hi. I look at you guys' show like every Sunday. Like, oh my God,
thank
you
you.
guys are so cool. Well,
Thanks.
I think that you were totally right about the whole thing. It's like two sides of a story or whatever. But if you look at like the school's version, it sounds like more better, because how is like 8 kids are gonna be like, oh, you don't believe in gay people, I'm gonna kick your ass. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And it's kind of what Russell's getting to when we're talking about determining the truth of something and figuring out exactly how reality works. granted, neither one of us have any evidence that anything in the story actually took place. It's just been a report. But there is a way of determining which one sounds more plausible, which one is more consistent with what we know about reality anyway. And we can narrow down what we believe to be the most reliable truth, or find out where the truth is more reliably than another.
Right. And when you're dealing with the real world, which isn't science, I mean, you can't control your experiments and things like that, you have to figure out which source is basically in a better position to actually accurately report the facts.
Yeah. See, I'm also like kind of in the middle of being an atheist and not, because like since I was little, everybody like church. You have to go to church. It's a God. It's Jesus Christ. But then when you get older, you're like, you see all this stuff happening around you. You're like, is there a God for real? And you see people dying, and then they're like, God, he goes to heaven, and you're like, is there any proof of this? And you read the Bible, and it really doesn't give you anything.
Yep.
And you think, you're like, is there a God? And then, like, older people in older generations, like, there is a God. You better not say that there's not a God, because there is a God. And you can't believe that.
Yeah, it's and I've been concerned about that too, in the sense that even within the scope of sticking with Christianity, the Bible, if there is one unforgivable sin that anybody could do, it would be blasphemy of the Holy Spirit and denial of the Holy Spirit, basically apostasy, which is something that we're guilty of, 73 times a week, I'm sure. It seems to me that if there were a God, if we are the result of some divine planning and part of some divine plan, that using the intellect that was given to us by that God shouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah.
And if it is, then I would say that if they're accurate and there is that God, then he's a malevolent. Well, I'm not going to say it, but who runs things like that? And when you make objections like that, which are completely reasonable, and they fit into much better logical arguments, much broader discussions that are good, sound arguments against the existence of God, believers will come back with objections, saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do that, and that's the worst thing you could possibly do." And who are you to question God, and who are you to question, morality or God's decisions, because God is way above everything else.
One of my favorite Bible stories, Job.
Mine too.
I mean, here's a guy who basically gets the snot pummeled out of him by Satan, who's acting with God's permission. And Job, at the end of the book, says, God, why are you doing this to me? I haven't done anything bad to you. And God's answer basically is 3 pages of, were you there when I created the universe? No? Then shut up.
Yeah, I read that too, and I was like, oh my God, is this real? Or is this retarded or what? But then I'm like an atheist, but then I'm not, because like sometimes I could be in my moments, I could be reading the Bible, like I could be reading Matthew, and I was like, wow, this could be right. But then I'm like, again, no, this could not be right.
But
go ahead.
But there's nothing that says that the Bible could be wrong in some places and right in other places. I mean, it's like an analogy I use is Spider-Man. Spider-Man lives in New York. New York's a real place, but there's no Spider-Man.
Not only that, but some of the inner truths of Spider-Man, the lessons, the morals that play in these morality plays.
With great power comes great responsibility is an excellent message.
Yeah.
And God could learn a few lessons from it.
Yes. But just because that portion is true, that doesn't mean that there is a Spider-Man or that any of the rest of it's true.
Yeah, I understand.
You kind of gotta sift through there, and myself, having been a former Christian, somebody called at the end of the show 2 weeks ago, I think, and asked if I had ever felt the Holy Spirit. And in a way, you're kind of talking about something similar, where you can be reading the Bible, and parts of it would make sense or give you a warm fuzzy feeling. There's some good moral story in there, some good advice, some insight. And my answer then was that yes, I have felt, as far as I know, what he may actually consider to be the Holy Spirit. But I don't consider it to be the Holy Spirit, because the type of feeling that I've had, in church or whatever, I've also had listening to other music, secular music. I've also had it at plays and movies. It's just inner human emotion. It's the reason why you get, the chills and goosebumps at certain things.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's something eerie or something that is supposed to be divine. It's normal human reaction. And until there's some evidence to show that it's more than that, it seems to me rather silly to stick a name on it and presume that it therefore justifies all of your fictional beliefs.
Yeah, I understand that. But it's just, I guess, like now, some schools, they teach kids about Jesus Christ when, it's not right, too. When you really don't know if he's here or not. They
In
teach
public
kids,
schools?
Yeah, some public schools do. They talk about how Jesus Christ was this and how Jesus Christ was that.
Now, I know that, having taken some comparative religions courses in public schools, they'll talk about it from a historical standpoint, everything else, but they have limits on, they're not allowed to proselytize or preach on behalf of any religion.
They don't preach. They just tell you a little bit more than what you're supposed to know.
Yeah, see, I'd be interested in seeing what curriculum's going on in public schools with regard to that. But.
Yeah, I would too, because I don't know, like my kid came home and was like, well, we learned this today in school, and she's only in like the 9th grade, and I was like, I'm not supposed to be teaching you this in school.
Yeah, why don't you, we're going to let you go here in a minute so Russell can get back to this and other callers, but you can email tv@atheist-community.org, and if you include information about which school this is and what they're teaching, it'd be something I'd be interested in looking into.
Okay, thanks.
But thanks a lot, Sierra.
Bye.
Oh, and for all our atheist-friendly callers who just want to have a discussion.
Yeah, you can meet us at Threadgills after the show. We're on until 6 o'clock. You can come down somewhere between 6:30 6:45. Threadgills is on Riverside. Come on down and have dinner or just, a drink and some conversation, whatever you want. We'd love to have you all down there. But, you were starting to get into how do you determine truth and...
Yeah, well, the thing is, I'm not really going to answer that question very thoroughly, because that is like the main question in philosophy that has been hashed out for thousands of years.
I'm so crushed. I was expecting Russell the Oracle today.
Unfortunately, I'm not an oracle, and nobody is, which is something that is right in line with my topic. One source that I found very useful in sort of distilling my thoughts about this was I read a book, or most of a book once, by Bertrand Russell called The Problems of Philosophy, where he talked about basically how do we actually know anything? And the answer is we don't, if know means you know things with 100% certainty. But there are degrees of certainty, and Bertrand Russell, I think you said to me, was a logical positivist, and he believed that there are basically two kinds of things that we know. One is things that comes in through our sensory input, like when I feel this table, it's hard, and when I look at the table, it's brown, and I've got very bright lights reflecting from it from overhead. And so these are specific sensory inputs that I use, but another kind of knowledge that we have is sort of a model that we keep in our heads, sort of an idealistic form of things, as Plato might say. So for instance, we know a circle when we see it. We look at a drawing on the paper, which is just some scratches of lead written on dead trees. And we say, oh, that's a circle. And Bertrand Russell and Plato would both say that the reason we recognize that as a circle is that we have this construction of what an ideal circle really means. And then we sort of project that onto exactly what this thing is that we're looking at on the piece of paper. Richard Dawkins actually said something similar in his book, which was Unweaving the Rainbow, where he has a chapter where he argues that basically we're all living in this elaborate virtual reality. We don't have we don't have completely accurate understanding of what's really going on in the world. Richard Dawkins would say, like most philosophers I think would agree, that there actually is a real world out there independent of the rest of us. But then he would also say that what we perceive is not the real world directly. What we get is sort of a limited view of it, because we get some photons in our eyes, and we get some vibrations in our ears, and we get, stuff through our nerves to tell us how things feel. And then our brain is basically an elaborate computer which constructs a thing in your imagination that tells you what the world is really like. And there are also ways that the brain can trick you because it doesn't correspond to things that are really out there. Like if I were to tell you to imagine a purple dragon, this image would pop into your head. And you could say it's definitely true that you're thinking about a purple dragon right now. But there is no actual purple dragon. You're not relating it to something that you've actually seen or touched or smelt. And so there are sort of these different varieties of truth, I think Bertrand Russell would say.
So it's like when if you see a circle on a piece of paper, and everybody would look at it and generally say this is a circle.
Yeah.
There is some point at which the circle becomes deformed enough to where we would say, okay, it's no longer a circle. What we're really talking about is, yes, it's like we're really using shortcut speech all the time. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, yes, I am aware that the image on that piece of paper or the remnants of the lead form something which is a rough approximation of the impossible platonic perfect circle.
which is a regular shape that has no edges but only smooth curves.
Because it's a colossal pain in the ass to try and speak like that all the time. So we develop these shortcuts. We say, whoop, that's a circle.
Right.
Fundamentally we can show that it's not a perfect circle, but we didn't say that's a perfect circle. We just said that's a circle. There's some approximation of it. There's a lot of these little thought experiments when you're talking about epistemology and discovering the truth of the reality that you experience. A caller last week who we had on for a little while mentioned briefly, although we didn't touch on it, the idea of a 5-minute Earth. And the reason I didn't go into it is because a 5-minute Earth, a 10-minute Earth, a 15-year Earth, a 15 million year Earth, they're all essentially the same thing. Basically, the 5-minute Earth thing is, how do I know that the Earth and everything didn't just come into existence 5 minutes ago, including all of my memories of the past, and in the exact state that it is now?
It's basically this is much more easily relatable to modern people now that they've made the Matrix.
Well, this is slightly different from the Matrix argument.
Yeah.
The Matrix fits
in the Matrix, there is a real world. It's just completely different.
There's a super meta reality that you're unaware of.
Right.
In the 5-minute Earth, they're saying that reality just popped into existence 5 minutes ago with a memory and a history and all of the indicators that would be exactly the same as if it had been here for 15 billion years. And my assessment of that is that the 5-minute Earth and the 15 billion year Earth, or the 15 billion year universe, they're equal. It's irrelevant to even consider that because we still operate within the framework of the reality we experience. We still have, the scientific tests in this 5-minute Earth still function exactly as they would as if the Earth had been here for 15 billion years. So if there's no functional difference, there's no point in considering that. That's slightly different from the new evil demon and the Matrix and the brain in vat type of thought of experiment where everything that you're experiencing isn't real, you're really in a matrix or you're really a brain in a vat. And I have a completely different reason for dismissing those, and that is that they all describe some kind of meta-reality, that what I'm experiencing isn't really reality. There's some other super reality that I don't know anything about, and until I do, and until there is good reason to think that there is, then it's not a concern. And even if it does exist, I'm still stuck within this framework until there's a demonstrable way of recognizing this super reality. So I need to work within the rules of this framework and build my image of reality based on what I'm actually experiencing.
Exactly. You want to pick up some more calls?
Sure. Let's try Wanda.
Hi.
How you doing?
Hi.
Well, like I told the guy that I talked to, I'm all right for my age. What do you expect? Did y'all know about this? In the Chronicle last week, it had a pretty good size ad about Bill Moyers to PBS, KLRU, and the copy says, in a world where religion is poison to some and salvation to others, how do we live together? Is the vision of religious tolerance just a utopian dream? These are among the questions Bill Moyers explores with some of the world's most stimulating authors in the new 7-part series. Did you know about that? It's Friday evenings at 8 o'clock.
We're not allowed to actually advertise other shows, but yeah, I was aware of the show. I have been watching it. Had good guests on there.
I didn't know that, but I've read stuff by Bill Moyers that struck me as fantastic.
I've been saving them so I could burn them to DVD for you.
Oh, thank you.
The first episode, he had Salman Rushdie on, who is always a
Yeah, I
pleasure
heard
to
about
listen
that.
to. The man is just absolutely brilliant.
Although I
and-
heard he's not such a pleasure to read.
Well, I wasn't that big a fan of the books, but listening to him talk, and while I definitely don't agree with him on everything, it was
Let me tell you what my belief is. I believe in necessitarianism.
Necessitarianism.
Yeah, look it
Okay.
up in the dictionary.
Okay,
All right.
you could describe it.
Well, it says everything.
Are you the mother of invention?
Briefly, it says everything that happens has a previous cause, or
You're talking about essentially determinism, that there's a
Yeah,
necessary cause for
something
each
like
event.
that. They use fancier words, but
No, I understand.
let you go.
All righty.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks.
Wanda. Yeah, I've been trying to watch that. He had Salman Rushdie on first, then an author I haven't watched it yet, which is why I keep forgetting her name. But he had 2 guests on that week, and one of them was Colin McGinn, who's one of my favorite philosophers and just really, really great to listen to.
Yeah, well, I really like Bill Moyers. One of the things I remember reading that he said was basically agreeing with me that journalists, there's this disturbing trend that they basically say, okay, here are the things that were sent to us. We didn't bother to investigate them, but here's what one guy says. Here's what the other guy says. Now you decide who's right. And there used to be this concept of investigative journalism. I mean, Lois Lane springs to mind, who doesn't, just get a call from the president and say, "Oh, okay, Mr. President, here I'll
I'll come be your personal secretary.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Luther, I'll just write down everything that you say, and I'll report that that's what you said." She would actually go out there on a helicopter and try to figure out what's really going on and get in huge trouble, and Superman has to come and save her. But I digress. The point is, journalism at its best really ought to work that way, which is that a journalist goes out there and figures out what's actually true and then reports it to people, and then they tell them things that they wouldn't have known if it weren't for the journalist going out there and figuring it out. This whole business of, well, party X said one thing, party Y said the other thing, and so decide for yourself, is really kind of ridiculous, especially when you consider that sometimes one of the people that they're quoting from actually has a very, very, very minority opinion on what's really going on. Like, it would be as if you were to interview one NASA scientist who talks about the moon landing, and then you at the same time interview one crackpot who says, "We never landed on the moon. That was all a hoax designed by the government to," I don't even know what their motive was supposed to be, but
To convince the Russians to stop trying to get to the moon because we got there.
I guess.
It was a big hoax. You don't believe
Yes.
that?
Well, not really.
I'm kidding.
And when you have like every scientist who ever actually worked on anything relating to astronomy saying one thing, and you have some guy who's working in his basement and has no clue about anything scientific and has no connection to NASA and never worked on anything peripherally related, the truth doesn't lie halfway in between them. It lies with the vast preponderance of scientists.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, 99.999% chance.
I have a hard time with conspiracy theories. I saw part of what I think is probably a pretty good film, covering some of the issues surrounding 9/11. But I think the film was in general trying to build a big conspiracy theory. And I haven't seen all of it, so I don't want to judge. But
well, we get people who call this show and say things like, George Bush personally ordered those planes to fly into buildings.
My thing is that, while I've seen some good evidence, some evidence that I would say needs to be investigated and other things on a number of issues, not just 9/11, I have a hard time accepting some of the bigger conspiracy theories because we're pretty lousy about keeping secrets.
We people, yes.
And we're pretty, you're talking about a group of people who are all somehow, I hate to say evil enough, but they're all of enough of one mind to actually not only do something, but keep it completely hidden. And like nobody ever changes their mind. Nobody ever has second thoughts or cold
Not
feet.
one person who is actually involved in the conspiracy ever comes out and says, by the way, we were doing these awful things. The people who always blow open the conspiracy are people who have absolutely nothing to do with the power structure they're talking about.
It's independent journalists.
I pieced together the shadow on this photograph to figure out that this is what's really happening.
And I'm not saying that they're wrong, because some of these things happen, and but when people start calling and talking about the Masons with the Illuminati with the blah blah blah, and maybe it's true, but you got to come with more than testimonial,
right?
Because I don't buy it for God. I'm certainly not going to buy it for the Illuminati.
Yeah, I actually heard a Mason interviewed on the Infidel Guys podcast.
Oh yeah,
and it turns out that they are.
Shriners with money.
They're a frat house. I mean, they're a nationwide fraternity, basically, of people who hang out and like.
And you're taking this Mason's word for it?
Well,
He's
no.
obviously trying to cover up the conspiracy.
But it sounded good.
He's my very well-spoken gentleman.
Yes.
Let's go on to Kevin. How you doing?
Hey guys, I appreciate y'all taking my call. I'm trying to get my mind around this argument. I guess I'm an atheist-friendly Christian, I guess you would describe me as.
Cool, you can come to dinner.
But what I was curious, what would it take, or what could happen that would make you guys say, you know what, there could be a chance that there's a God? What is there?
Absolutely nothing. I'll say that right now. There could be a chance that there is a God.
So you're saying that you wouldn't be open to the idea that...
I'm saying you wouldn't have to do anything additional. I will say that right now. There could be a chance that there is a God.
But what would it take for you guys? Is there to actually go, you know what, this is pretty good evidence here?
That it's more likely that there is a God than there isn't? That's what you're saying?
Right.
Ooh, well, Jeff D. likes to say that God is basically an infinite being, and so there would have to be basically an infinite amount of evidence presented to the senses.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little less hard-nosed. I would say that a really, really, really impressive display of either power or knowledge with no doubt left that I was hallucinating it, because a lot of people reported exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, would be good enough for me.
See, and I'd have to go with consistently reliable empirical evidence, because, and I don't necessarily mean that you would have to, certainly if there was a God and he appeared right here, and, there is always the option of, divine revelation, although I'm likely to think I'm going crazy.
Right, but I'm sure that if like everybody in the atheist group were assembled at that time and we all saw the same thing, we all wrote it down independently, and he stated things that he probably couldn't have known.
My objection, the reason that I was saying reliable, verifiable, consistent evidence is because when you actually look at the claims of religion, you don't even see that before we start doing any real investigation. When you take a look at the power of prayer, or the claimed powers of prayer, what we see is that anytime it's tested, anytime anybody does any investigation, there is no such thing as a power of prayer. two football teams both pray to God that they win. Only one of them is going to get to win. But you don't even have to use examples like that. I mean, there was a link that we had up here before about why won't God heal amputees? You know, there's this thing of, oh, my grandfather had cancer and we all prayed and it went into remission, and that was God. Well, meanwhile, their grandfather is in a hospital on chemotherapy and radiation and everything else, and that doesn't get any credit. Well, all right, bring me an amputee, lay on hands, have people pray, find a couple of true Christians, and grow his arm back. I mean,
Well,
obviously
I guess-
God can do that.
Sorry. Well, how about this? You guys are probably a lot more up on the Bible than I am. You probably
Maybe.
I mean, that's the truth. I mean, when
Maybe.
you find an atheist, they are up on their stuff.
Well, it depends, but go ahead.
I mean, what about in the times we live in right now? And I'm not a doomsday guy, but when we go back, you know, he's talking about Israel, and it always seems a focal point of the world. There's always stuff going on there, and you know, 2,000 years after the fact, and we're still, you know, this one little spot on the world. You know, it's not even as big as Rhode Island. It's
But
still
these
one of
people are
the big-
So,
That's what's called a self-reinforcing delusion. See, for thousands of years, these people have been telling themselves that this is my land and God gave it to them. It doesn't matter if there really is a God or not. If you get people inculcated into a culture that says that over and over and reinforces it generation after generation, that's a self-reinforcing delusion. God becomes irrelevant to the question.
right,
then.
and there are all kinds
that
of
makes sense. But what I'm saying is this is a very small part of the world. We're talking about, you know, populace, and you bring in geography. We're talking about, sure, a lot of people have varying good definitions of what they think is true, but it's been in the public arena for that long, and to couple with everything that, you know, the Russians and the Chinese, they seem to be going a different direction. If you look at, you know the Revelations, you probably quote it better than me, but you talk about a 1,000,000-man army coming in from the east and the bear coming from the north. It's kind of, I mean, do any of these things
What?
you think about? Okay, well, I mean, the Bible talks about in symbolism, and they describe a bear. If you read in Revelations, a bear coming from the north. Which
I know,
is
right?
Russian.
Do you not think that those same verses, because they're so vague, could be interpreted to mean just about
Yeah, it
anything
could be
at
applied
any
to a
time?
lot of things.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's a
understand that,
reason
but what I'm
why-
saying is
there's
it's
a
kind
reason
of
why every
strange when you
single
look at
year-
all this stuff.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm just saying, if you know, look at it with from a skeptic's view, and I encourage that, like you say, do some research on it. Well, I mean, it just seems all kind of coming together a little bit. Not that it's going to blow up tomorrow.
And
But-
you're saying the same thing that's been said every 10, 15 years for the
Right.
last couple thousand years.
Well, that is true in a way.
yeah,
but
I mean,
the Bible
why would
Go
it be? Why would it have been difficult for God to create extremely specific prophecies about extremely specific events, rather than these vague things like the bear and there's going to be, there's going to be strife
'cause
and
then we would
earthquakes
figure
and
them
stuff.
Sure.
Right.
You're right.
I mean, it's like
it's all ambiguous, and you're going, well, what do they really mean? But
yeah, and if
it
you're
makes
of
you
a
think little
mindset,
bit.
where you would like these prophecies to be true, then you will sort of force the prophecies into the way that you would like to read them, so that
You're
it looks
saying
like they
a
are true.
self-fulfilling prophecy, or
Well, yeah, you're actually...
what I'm saying is just kind of, maybe say, you know what, there might be something to that.
Or it could be that you're witnessing other people who are thinking, you know what, there might be something to this. You're witnessing
Right.
their actions in that self. There's two logical fallacies in what you're specifically talking about. And one of them is when you're making an appeal to the masses, where so many people believe something, therefore it must be true. But that's a fallacy, because at one point, almost everybody believed the earth was flat.
Flat.
The other thing is the sharpshooter fallacy, where you fire a bunch of arrows at a wall and then you go up and draw bullseyes around them after the fact. And it looks like you scored 100%. That's what people do with regard to prophecy. You've got all these ambiguous, possible claims, and then as soon as something happens, somebody goes in and circles it and says, whoop, there's that prophecy. Whoop. Well, of course you get 100%. And the thing is that to me, if we're talking about ultimate truths, if we're talking about the existence of some God, even pick a specific God, and what he is, what he wants, how he relates to humans and everything else, you should be able to come up with evidence that doesn't require looking at the way humans act on behalf of those types of prophecies and then circling the ones that you think are his.
Right. One of my favorite things I heard Al Franken say about Pat Robertson one time, something like, so Pat Robertson will go on TV and he'll say, there's a woman in Ohio and she has cancer and now she's healed. And the question is, if God could get that specific, that it's in Ohio and it's a woman and it's cancer and it's healed, then why couldn't he just supply a name and address?
Look, I mean, I think we can both agree, like you were saying earlier, you got wackos on the right, you got them on the left, and I'll tell you that when I see some of these religious, TV evangelists going on there, and it just doesn't look like to me, I'm not predispositioned to judge them, but it does not, and if they are not from God or of God, what you believe is God, then it's not, I think that they're hurting the cause. And you have that element out
right,
there.
But we don't have any evidence to show that anybody is actually from God.
Yeah, I mean, what measurement?
That's why we're here. This is why we're having this conversation. We don't. The truth is, neither one of us know. I have faith that there is, and you guys are going, well, show me, and I understand it. But it's not right when you get an evangelist out there they're obviously doing something that like the Peter Popoff or
that guy.
Miracle Water. I just look at that and I cringe. Going, he's taken away from what you have these Christians that go out and they'll claim to be doing it for God. It's something really what I think that the majority of the public would think is not godly or of what a Christian would do. Well, they're probably not Christians.
Well,
and it's bad when they do that because it makes the people that have a, I'm not angry at y'all, and y'all aren't angry at me, but we can have a good time.
We're not angry at you. Right? I apologize if you thought we were angry with you. I'm not.
No, I don't. I've seen you angry.
Well, actually, no, you haven't.
Like me when I'm
actually
angry.
Been angry, but I have been riled. But what you're talking about, on the one hand, there's this problem of nobody can ever identify what a true Christian is, although some people will certainly try. And I think that is very much a strong argument against the existence specifically of the Christian God, this inconsistent revelation. You've got people who surely, truly, actively believe that there is a God. They both believe in the exact same God. They both believe that if they are faithful and devoted and ask this God, that this God will tell them what it wants them to know. Both of these people believe exactly the same thing.
No, I think
now,
hang on.
Let me finish. Let me finish this one real quick.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If there's those two people who believe exactly the same thing about exactly the same God, and they then get inconsistent and even sometimes contradictory revelations, then what you have is either that God doesn't exist and these people are making it up themselves, they're talking in their subconscious and coming up with these revelations, or that God does exist and he is specifically giving misinformation to them, which, if that's true, completely denies the nature of the God that these people both believe in. So the only logical conclusion when you have these inconsistent revelations from what is supposed to be the same God is that he doesn't exist. And that's why you have such a hard time trying to find out who is and who isn't a true Christian, because anybody who wants to be is just as much a true Christian as anybody else, because from my standpoint, they all have equal footing. They're all getting making their own determinations about what they want to be true.
Right. I guess what I'd say to that is if anybody's claiming to say they have had revelations, and I'm not smart enough to know. I'm not that cerebral. But if they're claiming to, have some special power and some unusual tie to God that's above someone else, I would question it.
Well,
so
I'm just talking about revelation about the true nature of something. Two Christians both pray to God about whether or not, let's say, gay marriage is right or wrong. And both of those people, true and honest believers, claim to have been given answers that are directly opposite each other.
Well, I would say to that, I go by what the Bible says. I'm not going to judge. It's not my part to judge them.
But
It's not my role. And I mean, you can interpret the Bible or the Quran or whatever. I guess anyway, I've heard you say.
but the question is why go by what the Bible says? Because you just said that if anybody claimed that God talked to them, then you would be skeptical about it. So why not also be skeptical about what the Bible says?
Because that's a whole bunch of people who are wrote down.
That's the only thing we really have to go by. Now, I'm not saying that God hasn't. 'Cause I don't know. But I would keep an eye open for that person that says, yeah, God told me to do this, or Pat Robertson. I think he's out there a little bit.
Let me hang on just a second. Let me hit 2 quick points and I'll let you come back. Number one, I've said many times on the show that if your position is just a flat out statement that I believe this on faith and I don't think it's logically or reasonably supported, I have no objection to that. I can't possibly comment on it or anything else. But what I'm hearing you say now is that you're going to trust the Bible, which is the words of long dead people writing down what they claim God told them to write, and yet you're disavowing anybody who comes up and says God told them something new.
So
books written by
I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know. All we have to go by.
Sure you are.
Okay. Well, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm a human. I don't know.
No, you're smart enough to look into it and consider the options.
Yeah, you're smart enough to investigate the truth.
Joe Blow here tells me God told him something, I'm going to be skeptical. But this book, whose author I've never met, who I know nothing about, who I don't have the originals of, this book, which has been edited or modified or could have been edited or modified, this book I know nothing about, which is ancient and is essentially the same thing as Joe writing down what he claims God told him. I'm going to believe this one, the one I know the least about, over the guy standing in front of me who tells me what he says God revealed to him today. Now, I of course would reject both of them because I don't buy the premise that there is a God to tell them this, and they would have to supply more evidence. But to go with this ancient text that we know nothing about over the word of somebody standing in front of you who you believe to be otherwise honest, that to me represents a big fallacy.
Well, I mean, if from your point of view, you could look at it that way. What I would say to that is these events took place apparently 2,000 years ago or more, and they were on the scene, and it was their account. And as a Christian, that's how we look at it. And that's in my view, that's the only way.
Yet you know nothing. You don't even know who wrote them. You don't know that those people were there.
That as part of being a Christian, you take things on faith, and that's right. What the pretty much the foundation of Christianity is faith.
Oh, no, I'm with you in the sense that I was a fundamentalist Christian studying, hopefully, to be a preacher at some point, up until just a couple years ago. And one of the critical things was in determining just how unreliable and unworthy of trust the word in the Bible is. It contradicts itself. It contradicts known science. There are absurdities. There's contradictions in the nature of what it describes as God. There are contradictions about what the path to salvation is. If you read James's primary focus is on works, while others are talking about by faith alone, which is an abomination. You've got these Old Testament stories about an egomaniacal God who's running around smacking down civilizations so his chosen children can take over, but he can't beat iron chariots. And then in the New Testament, all of a sudden you've got this loving, love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek God, who, oh, by the way, has decided he's going to send you to hell and torture you forever if you don't believe it. And you've got competing ideas about the very nature of everything within this religion. And yet, I don't mean for you to think that I'm attacking you, because I'm just explaining all the problems in a nutshell, which forced me to accept that this book is unreliable. These testimonials and these concepts are unreliable, and they represent ignorance and barbarism thousands of years ago. People desperately trying to define their reality, what we were talking about earlier, in this vacuum of information.
Well, out of curiosity, what was it? The totality of the experiences you had that drove you away from the church, or what?
There weren't experiences that drove me away from the church. I went about a semi-normal life. I was a fundamentalist Christian growing up. I was active in the church and ministry, and then I went off and joined the Navy and lived kind of a worldly, pseudo-backslidden, sinful life. And then around in my early 30s, I decided, you know what, maybe I've been going about this the wrong way. It's time for me to investigate what I actually believe, because there's a possibility that God might be calling me to be a preacher. And that's what started it. And it was a thorough investigation of the Bible, of Christianity, of history, of philosophy, of other world religions that led to my atheism.
Well,
I never got mad.
I hope that you can understand that. You know, I watch your show every Sunday down. I mean, religiously. Sorry.
That's all right. I love it when people say that.
They always say that,
I enjoy
too.
hearing I'm trying to understand all of it, kind of like a bunch of people are, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I hate it when I see the Christian, quote, Christians go out there on TV and, in my opinion, and everybody has an opinion, do Christianity an injustice by what they're saying and what they're trying to do, make it a capital gain situation where they're selling something, and I think that's wrong. And there are bad Christians that make everybody else look bad. I hope you guys can find your answers. I'm going to let y'all go.
Okay.
But I appreciate the dialogue.
We appreciate the call, and if you are atheist friendly, as are some of the people, you're welcome to come down and have dinner.
Yeah,
and also email.
And also, I don't agree with what you believe, but I mean, the kinds of things you just said about not agreeing with the basic money grubbing, atheists are evil Christians. That makes you my friend.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin and I could probably get along and have some really cool long discussions.
Yeah,
and I always like having those, because I've kind of been in that position, and that's not I've been where you are and now I'm better thing. It's just I've had similar experiences, but we're talking about accepting something on faith without good evidence, and the problems of all this. I know that there are plenty of wonderful, liberal, reasonable, I don't even want to say liberal, there are plenty of reasonable, intelligent, sane Christians who don't have these, nonsensical, fire and brimstone, evil atheist conspiracy ideas. I just wish they'd dump the rest of the nonsense. I find nothing good or beneficial about religion that can't be achieved without the baggage of religion, without the superstitious nonsense. You don't need religion for charity. You don't need religion to feel compassion for others. You don't need religion to enjoy life. You don't need religion to be moral. You don't need religion for anything. It fills these little voids, these gaps in knowledge, and if you would just go out and investigate. And also, and this is the critical thing, this is one of the key points that allowed me to kind of make a transition to say, I don't know. And it's okay that I don't know, because I'm not necessarily supposed to have an answer for everything right now. And this idea that because I don't have an answer, I'm going to stick God in there as an answer is crap, because God is the ultimate non-answer. It doesn't tell you anything. You're just, it's not even as good as sticking a finger in that gap. You learn nothing new. It's a non-answer. All it does is bring up more questions that are unanswerable. But anyway, I've rambled. Did you have more to add to Kevin?
Nope. I think that about covers it.
I'm gonna get the guys in the studio later. But yeah, as a reminder, since I said it briefly, Kevin's welcome to join us down at Threadgills on Riverside. The show's over at 6 o'clock. We get down there between 6:30, 6:45. And as an invite to Kevin and to everybody else listening and watching at home, you can always email tv@atheist-community.org. It goes to the entire cast and crew and some of the people behind the scenes in the ACA. If you've got good topics that you want to discuss, maybe not even on the show, just have a good email conversation or debate. There's a lot of us who like doing that. We even have an Ask an Atheist list at Yahoo, where people can come in and say, I'm confused about this, or what do you think about that? So it's like, I don't know, the Atheist Experience, the sequel, offline or online or whatever. But,
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, you're on the air.
Howdy, Russell and Matt.
How you doing?
Hi.
Doing great. I sure am glad y'all are on the air. I think y'all really put on a good face for atheists in Austin.
Thanks, Joe.
You may not hear that often enough, but I really think that y'all are tolerant and friendly and cooperative and educational, and when you get a caller who doesn't quite understand, it's understandable to us, because we atheists are constantly faced with that, and not a lot of information comes out through the media about us.
I think that I'm kind of sitting on a precipice, because there's this concept within Christianity of love the sinner, hate the sin. And I find myself in that position a lot, where I despise the terrible dogma that resides within Christianity and other religions. And I despise how organized religion preys on the weaknesses of individuals, that robs them of any opportunity to improve their lives, to take credit for what they are. I mean, we're human beings with wonderful potential. These people who get off of drugs and then say, oh, God got me off drugs. No, he didn't. Take credit for what you've done with your life that's good. And I'm in that rough position where I love the people, and I don't mean to condemn them, but when they're believing stupid things that I find harmful, I'm going to say so.
But it's not all necessarily their fault.
No. It's, well, we're kind of raised to the point where, I mean, I've got an atheist roommate who, when somebody sneezes, will say, God bless you. And I know plenty of people too. I mean, that becomes kind of just a cultural thing where there's not even any real reference to a real God. It's just something we do, and that's the culture we live in. But anyway, I interrupted you. Sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
Oh, well, that's okay. I heard a caller a little while ago say, what would it take to convince the atheist? What kind of evidence would it take to convince us atheists that there is a God? And I've heard this question quite a lot, and I took a lot of time to think about it, because I'm waiting to see some evidence. I'm really eager, But as an atheist, I always have to come back by saying the only evidence that would suffice would be a real God itself, because any other form of evidence can be faked, and very often has been, or can be attributed to nature or something else. But to just say that, that volcano exploding, that's God, that's not good enough. We need to have a real God come down, because if they can't provide that, if they haven't found a real God, a tangible God of some kind that they can show to everybody, regardless of our beliefs or non-beliefs ahead of time, then it really isn't so important, is it? I mean, they've really got a story and not much more, and they're getting a tax exemption, and they get special favors in the Supreme Court even. But this is a very high-pressure situation a lot of people have in their lives, but it's all based on claims with no real solid evidence that anybody can back up.
Yep.
Right. Well, this actually, I disagree with you slightly, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about levels of acceptance. There's different levels of certainty, and there's never going to be anything such thing as 100% certainty, but there would be such a thing as what I would call preponderance of evidence. A typical example is that we can't directly see electrons, but we can measure their effects. And there's a BC cartoon, the notoriously fundamentalist comic strip BC, where some guys are bitching about their lives or something, and then the stars form some sort of message, saying some witticism probably. And I was thinking, if the stars spontaneously rearranged themselves in the sky one night while I was looking and a bunch of other people were looking, and we were pretty certain it wasn't a drug trip or anything, that would be really good evidence, especially if it said something specific about it being God. I know it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be a good start.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, while I might think it was crazy if I got had a voice in my head saying, oh, I am the Lord thy God, blah, blah, blah. I might suspect I'm nuts. There are some things that I would probably say, you know what, well, this isn't 100% proof. All of a sudden the case is stronger. The problem, I think, is that what we see, especially in the area where you've got these intelligent design creationists who are trying to oppose evolution as an explanation for humans, and they come up with these terribly convoluted ways of saying, look at how wonderful and unique the Earth is, and if it was 1 inch this way or 1 minute this way, or this hadn't happened and this had, I mean, it's just, the odds are astronomical. It's like 10 to the 650,000, just absurd odds with no real understanding of, first of all, what the odds really are and what they're looking at, because, I've seen them do calculations against the spontaneous forming of proteins that are required for life, and yet they use modern proteins. when evolutionary theory doesn't say anything about, that modern proteins spontaneously erupted from the void. We're talking about really simple things, which, I don't know, maybe, what's that word? Evolved. How do you throw out the core of evolution and just throw up the straw man of, oh, so you're saying that DNA formed out of the ooze? No. I mean, and when you throw up numbers like that, when you don't know, I mean, deal out a deck of cards, shuffle them up, throw them up in the air, put them back together, deal them out, and look at the order. You know what the odds are that actual order came up?
Very small.
It's 100%. It happened. The only reason that there's any significance to it is that you're looking at it after the fact. If instead you had pre-written down what an order for that deck of cards, that would be amazing. If you predicted an order and shuffled the cards and then dealt them out and they come up in that order, I mean, that'd be a great magic trick.
Right, and this is kind of what William Dembski calls specified complexity. The problem is that he always skips the specified part when he's talking about, actual DNA.
Yeah, if 4.5 billion years ago...
Or assumes the specified part, I should say.
Yeah, if 4.5 billion years ago somebody wrote down a DNA sequence that was, mine... Now you're talking about some real, that's some high odds that after 4.5 billion years, we'd find out that my DNA sequence was matched exactly what somebody wrote down. But that's not what evolution works. You can't do this correlation / cause and effect thing and look at what's occurring and then attribute a significance to it as if the results were pre-planned. But.
Well, Matt, you said something earlier in the show about you being on a radio show interview in the coming few days.
Right, at Co-op.
I didn't quite get that. Could you say that again for those who may not have heard?
Wednesday the 19th, I think the show is called Interviews. They emailed the group looking for somebody to come on and talk about atheism. It's from 1 to 1:30, I believe. There should be more information at the website. We'll get a little blurb up there if there's not.
It's on Co-op Radio, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Is that what I said? Did I say Co-op or
Yes.
did I say Coop?
Because
I always want to say Coop because it's
Still a
KO.
good radio station, yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot. Once again, y'all have a great show, and I hope other viewers will call in and let you know their opinions, and I'll go ahead and listen now. Thanks a lot. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks,
you.
Joe. And Joe is a ACA member, board member, and does our newsletter for us.
Right. So he's not an unbiased
Yes.
source when he just calls in and says, you have a great show.
Yeah. And Joe's definitely not unbiased.
We know.
But I appreciate Joe.
Me too.
And
Joe's a great guy and gives excellent tours.
yeah, I know it's 6 billion to 1 for a bridge hand, but I didn't want to give out actual numbers. Robbie, you're on the air.
Robbie?
Hello.
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 Let me turn off the phone. That's not my name.
You're not Robbie.
No.
Okay.
Muted my TV.
Did you call to say something about atheists and the right to vote?
Yes, I did.
Cool.
Well, no, not about the right to vote now. I apologize. Am I calling the wrong number?
No, you're on. What's up?
Okay. Well, just judging from the things that are said, I'm assuming you guys are real familiar with Bill Hicks and some of his comments that he made in shows about, like the rednecks in Alabama. Come here, buddy. We're Christians and we don't like what you said.
Yep.
He says, forgive me then.
Then forgive me.
And
Yeah.
so I was reminded of that on I watch the morning talk shows on Sundays, and I was reminded of that. There's a situation I'm sure you guys might have heard of about the Cleveland Imam. I believe he's from Palestine, and he came over. He's one of the leaders, and he was a leader in New York. He was a leader in Cleveland, and he was right after 9/11. He was scrutinized. I'm not sure of all the details. I know that he's in jail now, awaiting extradition, or not extradition, but deportation back to Palestine. And he had a number of religious leaders. What would you call it? Multi-denominational or across the board, Jews, Christians, Islam, Muslims, that all spoke on his behalf and said that he had always been a beneficial religious leader in the area. And there's one religious leader in his area. They showed a video of him supposedly taking donations for some sort of jihad and speaking very vehemently against Israel. And they cut to this one Pentecostal minister in the area, and it was exactly what Bill Hicks had described. It was like, well, this guy's gone on trial. He said, these are indiscretions in my youth. I was a young guy, just came from Palestine. I was speaking out against something that had gone on, was very personal to me. And that's just something that I'd like for all Christians who may be listening or people who are questioning is, like you guys were saying, just expand your horizons and kind of come to a middle ground where at least you can say, I have to speak out against what I hear usually from that side. I'm going to stop babbling now.
I'm actually really picky about when I get quotes or you hear quotes that are out of context. First of all, I am a big Bill Hicks fan, but since I've had this conversion, it's really easy for people to go back and take a look at things that I wrote years ago or things that I said or did years ago and say, well, you said this and you believe this. Yeah, but you know what? Changed.
Yeah. This particular imam
I'm wishy-washy.
Was videotaped saying these really, derisive things in 1991, I believe.
Yeah.
And he was called on it, like, back in the 90s, in like 93, 94, and they threatened him with all kinds of deportation and stuff. And like I said, a lot of people stood up on his behalf and said, I think he's a totally different person now. I believe it came to a head in 2002. And he's been in jail for the last 14 months or something, and they're going to deport him. But
we see a similar issue when we start going back to look at documents involving the Founding Fathers, where, on one hand, you've got this document where Thomas Jefferson says X, and in another document, you've got him saying something else. And you've got to take a look at when was this said. Are we when we look at Thomas Jefferson, are we talking about somebody who was a Christian who became a deist, or a deist who became a Christian, or somebody who varied at different times? And also, what was the purpose and origin of what they're talking about? Because when you're talking about some of the things that were said as official statements as the president, those were written by other people. These were statements that Congress would basically say, okay, we want you to give this message. And, doing their duty, they do it. When you look at the private letters of a lot of these Founding Fathers, that's when you start getting into what they really thought. And when they start talking about the separation of powers, when you've got Thomas Jefferson who cut up the Bible and removed everything out of the New Testament that was supernatural and only kept, like the words of Jesus and these moral lessons, I think even if you wanted to call him a Christian, which some people seem proud to do and eager to do, he's a very different type of Christian than the people who are wanting to claim him.
Yeah, and that was something that I actually saw defended this morning on the morning talk shows, was that basically we are a Christian nation. And, it's hard to listen to. But to boil it down to a simple and hopefully brief point, I want you to understand that this guy is not he's a Muslim leader, in the community. He wasn't any type of, otherwise a leader of any nation or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my point, is the basic Christian principle of, forgive me then. I was in the wrong. And you didn't see that out of several prominent leaders in the area.
Sure.
So,
and, we don't see that in a lot of other areas, too.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Robbie.
Appreciate you guys being there.
We've got Mike.
Yeah, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Listen, I was going to say, Matt, have you ever thought about writing a book? Because you seem to have a long and varied experience. It's kind of interesting. I mean, you didn't just wake up and be an atheist. And I feel like I've already written several.
Between forum posts and essays and articles and stuff and different how many shows have I done up here now? But yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
I'm so boring. I've always been an atheist.
Well, I know. I mean, I'm just saying it'd be like that. If you were an athlete and you were an athlete your whole life and you're great, that's not very interesting. But if you broke your leg and you learned how to come back from it. That
If you got testicular cancer and then won seven,
well,
never mind.
that's just kind of tacky.
And then you
Anyway.
bench press 2,000 pounds.
If you won 7 Tour de France.
I wanted to talk to you about souls because I find the discussion about the existence of souls more interesting than the existence of God. And I know that atheists don't kind of altogether, right? No atheists believe in the existence of a soul.
No, that's
I won't
not
say
true.
no atheist.
There's no pockets. That,
In the strictest definition, with atheism just being a lack of the existence of a god or gods, doesn't necessarily mean that they don't believe in everything supernatural. Buddhists, for example, are atheists. They don't believe in a god, but there are Buddhists who believe in reincarnation, which implies a soul and supernatural stuff. We aren't those kind of atheists. I don't believe in a soul, and
Me neither.
Neither does Russell.
okay. Well, I that's when I think about it. My mother recently died, and so it's kind of hard to reconcile the fact that her soul is just okay. That's it. She's gone. That's it. That she, and I understand that. Of course, I would think that. I mean, it seems like a desperately clutching at something to believe in, but I felt like that about everything, even my cat. I mean, I'm seriously. I don't think that means there's a La La Land and a Bell's amusement park where everybody goes to. And, a girl I knew who was an atheist once said, and I think you all have said that too, that you think when your soul dies, it's like this electromagnetic fart. Your soul just goes off into the atmosphere.
Well, I wouldn't say. I don't think there's a soul. The only soul that I would actually kind of accept is the poetic soul. The idea of the nondescript, that which makes us human, which would to me be the amalgamation of my conscience and everything else. So, while I die and the energy dissipates, there's nothing like a soul that would carry on, or that there's nothing which would be me besides the material bit.
Yeah, I'd like to say I'm really sorry to hear about your mother. My parents are both still alive, but sometimes I know they're going to die someday, and sometimes I imagine them being gone, and it's hard for me to even deal with the act of imagining it when it hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
And it's not like irrational to think about the person as sort of still existing, because I mean, like Richard Feynman, who was a physicist and one of the biggest skeptics there ever was, who talked about how he would go on hikes and have conversations with his late wife, because I mean, she'd been a big part of his life. He could clearly remember her personality, and he wasn't really ready to give up on thinking about her in the same way that he was used to. And my perspective on death and loss has always sort of been that the act of remembering somebody who's died is sort of their legacy to the world, because they've left sort of an imprint on your mind. And, it's not real immortality. I mean, if I want to die, I don't want to live on... I don't remember who said this, but it might have been Woody Allen.
Woody Allen,
yeah. I don't want immortality by being remembered by a lot of people. I want immortality by not dying. Nevertheless...
Either when it happens, either.
Nevertheless, I think being remembered by a lot of people shows that a person had an impact. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, giving yourself the conceit that the person is still listening and interested in what you're saying.
Well, hey, I really appreciate that, man. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Have a good dinner.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for calling. And, you're welcome to come down as well. As a reminder, we got less than a minute left. If you didn't get through, you can always email tv@atheist-community.org. We'll do what we can to respond to you. Any atheist or atheist-friendly people who'd like to join us, we're going down to Threadgills here shortly on Riverside.
I'm starving.
And, yeah.
I want some of
Russell's hungry. We're getting some food. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in this week. Thanks, Russell, for coming down.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back again next week, but there won't be live shows in the final 2 weeks in July, and then we'll be back again in August. Any other questions, hit the website, drop us a line. Appreciate it, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.